The year is 2005. Google Maps is brand new, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the movie, is playing in your local movie theater, and Reddit has just been launched. A wild, strange, and distant time, right? But amidst all this, something else truly special emerged. A perfect blend of American preteen culture, high-octane storytelling, and the timeless magic of Greek mythology. Now, of course, I'm talking about Percy Jackson and the Olympians. As a kid, I was obsessed. Monsters, prophecies, and just fun, relatable characters. It was pure gold. But as the years have gone on, dreadful adulthood has crept into my life, and I drifted away from the series. Recently, though, I've been seeing news of the TV show, and it got me wondering what's been happening with the series in recent years. Now, to say that this series has absolutely exploded in popularity would be a massive understatement. We're talking movies, TV shows, spin-off series, unhinged fandom romances, and even an unofficial fan war with Potter, the whole 9 yards. So in this video, I'm going to dive into it. We'll explore what makes Percy Jackson so special, chart the series' history, and uncover the secrets behind its enduring appeal, and finally explore where everything is at today to understand whatever happened to Percy Jackson. Hi everyone, my name is Otto, and welcome to Exits Examines. We'll be exploring series, franchises, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below. Okay, so this is deceptively a gigantic series, and things can quickly spiral out of control. But let's start simple. Percy Jackson and the Olympians is a book series written by Rick Riordan that sold a staggering 190 million copies. Now, I know for me at least, I kind of get desensitized to numbers being thrown around, but just to put this into perspective, that's enough to give one book to every single person in both Japan and the UK combined. So if you ask some random person on the street to name their favorite YA series, chances are this would be one of the top ones. So what makes these books so insanely popular? Well, the premise is simple. Greek myths, monsters, heroes, and gods are real and living it up in modern times. And the best part is that they're just as petty, stupid, and, let's be honest, interested in procreation as their ancient counterparts. Now, this last adjective in particular has spawned a metric ton of demigods, basically half gods, half humans. To keep these demigods running from all over the place, mugging everything up, enter Camp Half-Blood, a training ground conveniently located on Long Island. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world are Greek gods doing on Long Island? And I would say that's a fair question. Basically, Olympus, the god's headquarters, is located wherever the flame or the heart of the West burns brightest. At the time of the books, that place is New York City. Anyway, at Camp Half-Blood, you're claimed by your godly parent, and this determines which cabin you'll be in. We've got Ares for the battle-hungry, Athena for the brainiacs, and Aphrodite for, well, you get the idea. But most importantly, you get a killer camp t-shirt. And it's not just gods we're talking about. We've got the whole 9 yards of Greek mythology in these books. Monsters, prophecies, fatal flaws, and epic quest, all given this really fun modern twist. Now, with all this godly chaos running around New York City, you might wonder why normal people aren't losing their minds. Well, that's where the mist comes in. It's a magical smokescreen that hides the world of the gods and monsters from human eyes. So if a demigod is holding a bronze sword, to most people it just looks like a fancy pen. Speaking of these demigods, many are diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, and this is no coincidence because most demigods have these because their brains are hardwired for ancient Greek, not English, and their ADHD is actually their natural born instinct to be alert and actually helps them in battle. Now, all of this is highlighted in the series' main character, Percy Jackson, a seemingly ordinary 12-year-old with an unusual and unintended tendency to stir up trouble wherever he goes. His life takes a dramatic turn when his mom drops the bombshell that his father is actually a Greek god, and this comes along with pretty much the mother lode of all family baggage. Okay, so slight spoilers here over the next 10 seconds, but this is especially problematic because it turns out that his dad is none other than Poseidon. Now, this is an issue because the big three, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, made a pact to have no more children due to their immense power and a particular prophecy. With Percy's mere existence breaking this deal, this pretty much paints a giant target on his back from day one. Luckily though, he's not alone. Grover, a satyr, and Annabeth, a daughter of Athena, with all of them getting into some classic Greek misadventures like fighting Medusa. And it's all just a fun, easy to understand, quick setup that puts us in the action action ASAP. Like I mentioned, through this story, we get to see this really interesting, crazy Americanized version of the Greek world, and this super fun blend showcases a remixed version of Olympus to the Labyrinth and beyond, and it's just great on a few levels, but not least of which is that it introduces new readers to classic myths in fresh and accessible ways. So all this sounds pretty straightforward, right? But the thing you have to realize about Percy Jackson is that this is just the literal tip of the iceberg. There are a shockingly huge number of books, side stories, and more here, and that's not even counting the interconnected universe. Now, you might be asking, what interconnected universe? Well, hold on, I'll get there, but let's start at the top and go over the books in the series so we all don't get lost. So the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles is the name attached to the overarching narrative, so basically most of the titles from the world of Percy Jackson. These mainly consist of 3 series, each with their own direction and kind of voice. So in chronological order, and the order you should probably read them without being totally lost, is number 1, the mainline series, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, which is really where everything started, and is by all accounts required reading if you're dipping your toes into the series. And this follows the completion of the first Great Prophecy. Next up, we have the Heroes of Olympus, which follows the events of the Percy Jackson series and is based on the second Great Prophecy. Now, you'll see a good amount of people stop at the main set of books for a lot of series like this, but I would not gloss over Heroes of Olympus. It starts with new characters, but don't worry, the old gang is still here. And it takes the story in some really interesting direction, and in my opinion, has some of the strongest books in the entire franchise, like the amazing House of Hades. So after these 2 series, there's another one called the Trials of Apollo, which is a bit darker and takes the story in some interesting new directions as well. So that's not too bad, right? There's just 3 series, but actually there's also a literal host of companion books, side stories, and guides to the world, including the Demigod Files, the Demigod Diaries, Percy Jackson's Greek Gods, Percy Jackson's Greek Heroes, the Ultimate Guide, Demigods and Monsters, Camp Half-Blood Confidential, Camp Jupiter Classified, Percy Jackson and the Singer of Apollo, and finally Sun and Stars, which is not really a side book and more of a standalone sequel to Trials of Apollo. But wait, we are not even close to done, because there are entire other spin-off series, including the Kane Chronicles, which is similar to Percy Jackson but with Egyptian mythology, and Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, which is similar to Percy Jackson but with Norse mythology. And these series are complete with their own separate graphic novels and their own companion books, like 9 from the 9 Worlds. Okay, so I promise I'm not trying to overwhelm you, but on top of all of this, there are even crossover books that tie the mainline Percy Jackson series in with the Kane Chronicles. Speaking of crossovers, there also are scenes in Magnus Chase where Percy shows up or is mentioned, so yeah, everything is interesting how it fits together in this universe. Okay, wow, so that was a lot of books, and to be honest, depending on how you count what's actually in the series, we're actually only halfway done. But let's come back around to that later when we discuss the series in modern times, because I need a break. So if all this talk of monsters and magic has you in the mood for some tabletop or gaming action, you might be interested in checking out today's sponsor, Dice Emporium. They have a gigantic selection of dice. Seriously, every single type you could possibly want. One of the best things is that they offer not only 7-piece D&D sets, but also a massive amount of individual dice. So basically, if you just need one more for your favorite set that maybe you've lost, this is the perfect place to look. I'm happy to support these guys, so if you're interested, check out the link in the description below. All right, back to Percy Jackson. Okay, so obviously there must be something good in here to spawn so many books. Well, I think a lot of this comes down to the characters. And yeah, you're probably saying, well, duh, but Percy Jackson is incredibly relatable, and his perspective perfectly captures the classic hero's journey in a modern mythological setting. But it's not just Percy. Pretty much every character is super memorable and very distinct. Grover, Annabeth, everyone's goth darling Nico, Clarice, even smaller characters like Drew just have so much presence, and the writing style is this perfect balance of fun, fast-paced, adventure, and serious and impactful moments, and it's no wonder why it has such a wide range of readers, even if it was tailor-made for middle schoolers. Quote, "Kids are a much tougher audience than adults. They won't sit through a bunch of extraneous information. The writer has to get to the point quickly and hold the reader's attention. I always imagine myself reading my own book aloud in 5th period right after lunch. If you can hold the attention of a classroom in 5th period, you're doing something right." Now, this type of mentality should come as no surprise to a former teacher for 15 years. Rick Riordan, inspired by his son, crafted Percy Jackson as a relatable, hyperactive protagonist and chose mythology because that was the only subject that his son found fun. So from the ground up, Riordan had a really strong grasp of who he was writing for, and you get the impression when you hear him speak, he just knows kids, and he just has this amazing presence. He's also super involved with the series, constantly giving interviews, writing blog posts, and his website is a great source of info for the series with a ton of really awesome additions like resources for teachers and advice for young writers, and it's just no wonder that people in the fandom affectionately refer to him as Uncle Rick. Now, that's a lot of praise I've just heaped on this series, but that's not to say that it's perfect by any means, and there has been a good amount of criticism over the years. Now, aside from the arguably predictable Christian backlash against the book disapproving the emphasis on pagan gods, some people have had difficulty reading the series as an adult, and I think this makes sense. Like I mentioned, it was written for a younger audience in mind, and practically every single page is constantly filled with hooks and action to keep people interested. I've seen people describe it as aggressively American, which I think is actually a good way to put it, and just to give you an example to show you what I mean, here's a quote from the first page of Battle of the Labyrinth. Quote, "The last thing I wanted to do on my summer break was blow up another school. But there I was Monday morning, the first week of June, sitting in my mom's car in front of Good High School on East 81st. So do you see what I mean? I don't think it's necessarily a huge issue because it does make it a super fun read, but I can see how it might be too much for some people. That being said, I do think as the series goes on, the books become a bit better with this, and arguably better written overall, with Trials of Apollo and Heroes of Olympus as standouts. Speaking of criticisms, the fandom can kind of put Riordan on a pedestal, and while undeniably talented, the parasocial relationship can at times kind of stop constructive criticism, and ultimately I think every writer can benefit from thoughtful feedback. But as far as problems to have, this is a pretty good one. But of course, what really drives the series forward is the fandom, and boy oh boy the fandom. I learned some things and saw some things I will truly never unsee, but it's undeniably a huge part of what makes Percy Jackson what it is. They are the extremely talented, extremely vocal, and sometimes extremely horny gears that make this entire thing go. But let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer creativity that's been on display here. A ton of people have grown up with the series, and as you'd expect, there's room for all types of talent. I think because the world is so fleshed out and easy to step into with easily distinct and relatable characteristics for people to identify with, so for example, the cabins, Greek first Romans, and the gods. Aside from that though, the characters are just so memorable, and this is really reflected in the fan art. And oh yeah, the fan art and cosplay are huge. It's incredible to see so much of it, and there are a ton of amazing artists in the fandom, which I'll try to link below. But if you start looking closer, you'll start to notice a eerie similarity between a lot of the works. Now, I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that I am in fact an idiot, and I have never heard of a ship, but boy oh boy did this fandom open up my eyes, sometimes in ways I'm not sure I entirely wanted. So for those of you who are not aware, a ship is defined as, quote, shipping, derived from the word relationship, is the term for the desire by followers of a fandom for two or more people, either real-life people or fictional characters, to be in a romantic relationship. And you may think that this is fairly cute and harmless, but oh no, the battles between some of these are real, bloodthirsty, and life or death. And don't even get me started on Nico. Anyway, moving on before I lose my mind, just focusing on the ship side would be a disservice because there are also other great aspects to this fandom, including a pretty huge amount of fanfics with some really good reads that I'll also link below. There also seems to be a fairly active RPG community here as well. That all being said, no fandom is complete without a little or a lot of drama. The most famous example is the infamous Percy Jackson vs. Harry Potter fan war. I think it's all in good fun, and the comparison was kind of inevitable. Both series have young protagonists on magic adventures, and while they share a similar hero's journey structure, the stories, characters, and worlds are vastly different. And then there's the whole comparisons between the authors, who obviously have taken different stances on certain issues. Now, I think my favorite part about this is the literal Percy Jackson versus Harry Potter debate, as in who would win in a fight, which never made sense to me because similar to the great Aragorn versus Jaime Lannister debate, there is obviously only one correct answer, and that is that Percy Jackson would absolutely obliterate Harry Potter. Boom, Percy is a literal demigod, don't come at me. Speaking of wars and conflicts, it's time to talk about the adaptations. Ah yes, the Percy Jackson films. You might think looking at the books, the recipe for success was in them. I mean, the writing is already super similar to a blockbuster with a ton of fun characters and set pieces. Well, yeah, spoilers, it's gonna get messy, but let's start with the facts. The movies consist of 2 installments, which follow the first 2 novels, and you might think to yourself, 2 movies, that's strange, I thought there were 5 books. Well, you get a gold star because you're right, and long story short, they had to cut following movies, partially because fans were not super happy with the movies. Now look, this is a classic example of the movie adaptation not being terrible on its own merits. I mean, it's not a bad movie per se, it's got some good visuals and decent actors. Like, I was really pleasantly surprised to see Uma Thurman of all people in here. But anyway, as an adaptation, it's just not that successful. So to give a very brief overview, basically, some key details and characters were fundamentally changed, so ages and even hair color don't really match, but more importantly, entire characters act totally different from how they would in the books. Take Grover, right? In the books, he's very low-key and filled with a ton of doubts and insecurities about failure. Well, scratch that, because in the movie, he's a slick, talking ladies' man, and I don't know, the entire thing just feels, in lack of a better word, very Hollywoodified, if that makes any sense. Now, what's really sad about this is that it easily could have turned out differently if, like so many other adaptations, they had just listened to the author. I know, crazy, right? And this is one of the first times I've seen the author so extremely and very publicly come out against the adaptation almost from the start, releasing a literal essay that he wrote to the producers detailing exactly what was wrong, and my man does not hold back, saying, quote, "There are things I like about this adaptation. Having said that, here's the bad news. The script as a whole is terrible. I don't simply mean that it deviates from the book, though certainly it does that to the point of being almost unrecognizable as the same story. Fans of the book will be angry and disappointed. They will leave the theater in droves and generate horrible word of mouth." And to give credit to Uncle Rick, this is exactly what happened. And you have to feel bad for the guy because it was probably like watching a slow motion train wreck, with him later saying, quote, "To me, it's my life's work going through a meat grinder when I pleaded with them not to do it. So yeah, but it's fine, all fine, we're gotta fix it soon." And fix it they indeed tried to do. In a rare case of an adaptation getting a second chance, the rights to the novels were transferred to Disney, and Riordan made a pitch for the show and they went for it. This time though, he was heavily involved from the start, which seems to have made a world of difference, with it being the most streamed original TV series across all platforms in the US near the time of its release. So the first season dropped in 2023, and the second season is apparently currently in the works. Now, compared to the movies, the show is much more faithful to the books and has some more time to develop characters and storylines. That all being said, honestly, I think people are still getting their feelings together on this, and to say it's universally loved would be a bit of an understatement, with a lot of people commenting on how the writing and acting is not always the best. Now, obviously the actors are age appropriate, so it would make sense that they're still getting their footing, but I will say, and this might be a personal thing, but I definitely felt some moments were a little cringe. That being said, maybe I'm a bit older than the target demographic, but speaking of that, I think this is a really tricky line to juggle, because at the core it is a YA story, and one that was heavily targeted at middle school audiences. And so the TV has to not only appeal to that original demographic, but also the people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on who grew up with it. Now, that all being said, it's still season 1, and things are just starting. We all know that shows can evolve or come apart as time goes on, so we'll just hope that it's the former for this. Now, interestingly, this entire situation bears a striking resemblance to what's been happening with Aragorn. Here's hoping it follows a similar path of positive reception, because after the way Disney ruined My Guy Artemis, I really hope that they learn their lesson. Now, there are other adaptations from the Percy Jackson universe going on right now. Well, kind of. So the Kane Chronicles have had this crazy development and were originally going to be made into films by Netflix, but the deal fell through and Netflix gave up on the rights. But this might not be the end. Over the past few months, there have been reports about a Disney Plus series based on the Kane Chronicle books. However, this was later debunked. That being said, with the pretty massive success of the Percy Jackson show, this could very possibly pan out, but we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so with all these TV shows and films, you would think there has to be a good amount of games to go along with it, right? Well, the short answer is no. Slightly longer answer is that there was a single game on the DS based on the first novel in 2010, and well, it exists. I mean, I think it's a fascinating piece of history in this universe, but as a game, it's a little janky, and safe to say that it feels low budget. Now, this is a shame because I think the world is rife with potential. I mean, my imagination is going wild combining Hogwarts Legacy and God of War. And speaking of Hogwarts Legacy, the huge success of that game along with the TV show might actually finally give the boost needed to make this actually come together. But there have been no rumors on this yet. Okay, so although we're lacking as far as video games, we have gotten a lot more in the form of other adaptations. Specifically the graphic novels. You have the graphic novel version of the entire Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Kane Chronicles, and also Heroes of Olympus. That being said, Heroes has had a bit more difficult time. So basically the first 3 of these were released in the 2010s, but there was a pretty large gap in production. But fortunately, in recent years, these got back on track, and my personal favorite, House of Hades, will be released actually next month in September 2024. And the fun does not stop there, because we got coloring books, Percy Jackson Legos, a musical, audiobooks of course, and also the iconic Half-Blood Camp t-shirts. Although interestingly enough, these aren't actually official anymore because according to a fact on Riordan's page, he had to stop giving them out at events because he never had enough of them. Also, as another fascinating side note, there is in fact a real Camp Half-Blood. Well, kind of, maybe. There's this organization called Camp Mythic in the East Coast US that features a Camp Half-Blood and Camp Jupiter in their programs. But their website doesn't go into details about what these programs actually entail or how it's related to the Percy Jackson universe, and I'm not really sure if it's official or if they're using similar names. Unofficially, it's cute, kind of weird, and if anyone knows more about this or has gone, I would love to know more about it. Okay, so that all being said, you probably have noticed that there has been a ton of stuff happening recently with the series. And actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot, like so much to go over, and it's kind of crazy, so let's get into it. Probably the biggest news of all is that the mainline series is being continued. Yeah, I'm talking about the OG Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It's technically not a 5-book series anymore. In 2023, The Chalice of the Gods was a follow-up to the original series, taking place after the events of the Hero of Olympus, but before the trials of Apollo, and this is apparently the first installment of a trilogy of new novels known as Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Senior Year Adventure, that will cover Percy's transition from high school to college. And yeah, work is being done on the series, with Wrath of the Triple Goddesses set to release in about a month from this video in September. Also, on a super interesting side note, in 2020 there was a short story in the universe partially dealing with COVID-19 called A Half-Blood Christmas. And in case you're wondering, demigods cannot get sick from COVID-19, however, they can still spread the virus. Now, if all of this metric ton of Percy Jackson media is still somehow not enough for the more diehard among you, remember how I said earlier how, depending on how you count the books, I didn't even mention half of them? Well, yeah, I present to you Rick Riordan Presents. Now, this, in my opinion, not very creatively named series, are books that are essentially sponsored by Rick and his editor. And they're the same general middle-grade adventure with lots of humor and action, and draw on myths or folklore. Their goal is to, quote, publish great middle-grade authors from underrepresented cultures and backgrounds to let them tell their own stories inspired by the mythology and folklore of their own heritage. Now, they set the goal of this to publish 4 books a year, and as you might imagine, there are a ton of these, with new releases, including their own standalone novels, happening all the time. Riordan has confirmed that the books are set in their own distinct universe from his, and he only edits the books and writes the introductions. Now, I'm just going to bite the bullet and admit that I have not had the chance to read these, but I'd be super curious if anyone has, and I'd love to know what people think and how they hold up compared to the mainline series. So yeah, that is all an extremely long way of saying that the future of Percy Jackson is looking strong indeed. New books, new shows, new graphic novels, an author who's putting a ton of energy and effort into the series, and for fans, this is all great. I mean, arguably, the series has never been bigger, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it all begs the question, well, why? What makes this series so good with such incredible staying power? Well, I think everyone has their own reasons, and like a ton of series this massive, there's really space to make it your own, especially with all the different cabins, gods, and characters to choose from. And on top of all of that, it really opened the door for a ton of people to engage with mythology in a relatable way. Aside from that, we really get to experience the growth of the characters in real time, similar to what was going on in Harry Potter. Percy Jackson starts as a 12-year-old, and as the series progresses, we got to grow up alongside him and all the other great characters that were in there. This is all helped along by the near constant and consistent releases and new media in the series. Like seriously, I don't think Riordan has ever stepped away from the series since it started all the way back in 2005. And this kind of constant energy being put back into the series really helps it grow. And I think we're seeing the culmination of all of that as the future has never been brighter, with new fans coming in all the time. And I, for one, am looking forward to the next time we get to visit Camp Half-Blood. Thanks so much for watching. I want to give a huge shout out to the Camp Half-Blood Reddit, which was enormously helpful while writing this, and to all the people on there who helped me fact check. As always, a gigantic and huge shout out to my patrons who keep this channel alive. And if you want to find out more about how to support me and the channel, please check out my Patreon link below. Aside from that, if you ever have any suggestions about what you want me to cover next, please let me know in the comments. It's always really cool to hear what you have to say. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.